Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NUFC 360 podcast. I'm your host, Mark. With me this week is Jack, Bo, and the financial football guru, Kieran Maguire, host of the Price of Football podcast. Thank you all for coming. Gentlemen, how are we?
Yeah, all good. How are you?
All good. All grand, thank you.
All good. Well, starting with watched England last night, and I thought what would be better to talk about than PSR. So we'll get into a bit of financial talk, because England was so drab, so very, very drab. But news up in Newcastle with PSR was that we had a mad scramble, and what appeared to us to be a last-minute scramble, which we didn't think was coming, and we heard mumblings of it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And all of a sudden, 2 players gone, lots of money exchanged. And yeah, Kieran, what's your thoughts on how Newcastle have handled it and where this has all come from?
Well, if we go back to sort of basics, under the PSR rules, you're allowed to lose £105 million over a 3-year period. Now, that £105 million, there's some adjustments. If you spend money on infrastructure, if you spend money on the academy, spend money on the women's team, spend money in community projects, all of that's excluded. So if we take a look at Newcastle's accounts for 2023 and 2022, the club lost £145 million in 2 years. Yes, you'll have some add-backs. That meant that 23-24 was going to have to be a balancing act. There's lots of positives. Newcastle United qualified for the Champions League. You're probably looking at 30 million quid there. You've got the kit deal with SEMA in terms of front of shirt. You've got a full year with Noon, side of shirt. You're starting to build up a portfolio of commercial partners. Because if you take a look at 13 years under the previous owner, Mike Ashley.
Yes, longest 13 years ever.
Commercial income didn't increase over 13 years. And you contrast that to... in my view, as an outsider, and I'm not trying to offend anybody here, but if I go back to 2008, I would be saying that I would be benchmarking Newcastle United alongside Manchester City. Big size, big fan base, perhaps Spurs as well. Let's be honest, not won many trophies, but still, a big club in their own right. And you take a look at what those 2 clubs have done over that same 13-year period, and the growth in commercial revenue was spectacular. So from a standing start, the new owners have managed to sign off deals which are very lucrative. So I thought that would help the club as well. So an extra 30 million from the Champions League, shall we say, probably an extra 30 million in terms of sponsorship and commercial. So you've got an extra 60 million pounds coming in. At the same time, players will be on bonuses for qualifying for the Champions League. So that's taking some out. They're looking overall, I got the feeling that Newcastle, they weren't in a terrible position, but they were probably a wee bit short in terms of hitting that £105 million. So it got to the end of the season. We knew where Newcastle's final league position was, and the club knew that as well. And the reason why that's important is that for every additional place you go up the Premier League, it's worth about £3.5 million. So the club have done their sums in May, and they said, right, we've got a shortfall of whatever it is. And then it's up to do the best. And of course, the last thing you want to do is to go out to the markets and say, look, we need 40 million, we need 50 million, we need 30 million, because that's sending a signal to all the clubs that are thinking of buying that we can lowball in terms of prices. So they held on and they held on and they held on, and they've done the deals. And I think it's fair to assume that they've made significant profits on those deals. Which, from my understanding, from talking to people in the industry, I think there is a similarity with Newcastle and Manchester City in the sense that they've tried to employ professional people to do a professional job. You can't say that with all clubs which have been acquired over the last 10 to 15 years in terms of some of the people they're employing to make decisions. So I suspect Newcastle have done their sums and they'll be on the right side of the line. Because if you're on that wrong side of that £105 million, it's an automatic 6-point penalty.
For any amount.
Yeah, it seems to be now the news is I think it's 6 points plus you could, for every extra, I think it's every extra 6.5 million, you get an additional 1 point deduction. So you can claim mitigating circumstances. So there is no definitive number, but reading the commission's reports, they think we should be starting on 6 going forwards. Doesn't mean that future commissions are held to that, though.
For me, as a fan looking from the outside in, they did seem to leave it extremely late, and we've sold 2 players. Doesn't look like we needed to sell 2 players from what I've seen. Again, and I'm going on what I've seen in news and media outlets and Twitter. But they were saying things like 10-point deductions. If that's going to be the automatic 6 and then maybe 6 on top, surely 1 player would have been enough to satisfy that need. Is there a reason why we would have tried and sold more than what we needed?
Well, if you look at the lad, for the sake of transparency, I'm a Brighton fan. If you look at the lads that signed for Brighton, he's gone for 30 million guaranteed by all accounts, plus add-ons, which would take it to 32. He had a book value, which was probably around about 5, so they made 25 million pounds profit. I got a gut feel that probably 30 to 40 over the line, so they needed a second sale to perhaps nudge that one through just to get on the right. They certainly. I saw some of the claims of 100 million pounds being needed and so on. I never thought there was any evidence to support that, but it is conjecture. It is an awful lot of guesswork. I've got a reasonably comprehensive spreadsheet that I use, but that just tells me about what happened in history. Going forwards, we don't know what the score was in terms of the bonuses that the players were given for qualification for the Champions League. Participation bonuses and so on.
And I was just going to ask the lads, as fans, what's your optics on this? Bo, I'll go to you first. What were your thoughts on when you saw A, the amount of money that we were supposedly having to sell, and B, leaving it so late? How did that make you feel?
I mean, it's bittersweet. I mean, you look at, obviously we thought Minteh would be a promising young starlet on our team, whether it was
Messi.
Exactly, coming through and hopefully shining by the end of the season for us. And then you look at Elliot Anderson as well, another academy product who had slowly starting to get better and better. I know for some of us started to get better and better. And we talked about this a while back when Mike Ashley still owned the club. Taking our sellable assets, our young promising talent, and eventually having to sell it off. And we thought we're past that. We thought with the new PIF era, this would be something that we wouldn't have to do anymore. But obviously with these new rules and PSR and everything, people who aren't in that top 6 are still going to have to continue to do it. So obviously the money and the profits that are coming in are great. I wouldn't have expected to get 35 million for Elliot Anderson. Would not have expected to get 30 million for Minteh, especially since he hasn't kicked the ball in the Premier League yet. I know if we looked at those figures last year, everyone would snap their hands off for that. So it is bittersweet. It's unfortunate, and obviously we know, like Kieran was saying, the club has employed people who are professional. So there is a bit of wonder. Why are we leaving it to June 30th to try and get these deals across the line when we had a bit of time, after that Australia trip. But I'm assuming that the club will come out and at least have some type of message, either going back and saying kind of what happened or giving us some type of background, because they've done that in the past. Amanda has been pretty good about being vocal with the fans, and same with Darren Eales as well. So, Jack, I don't know how you feel about it, but that's kind of my take.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think looking at it from, Kieran made a great point about the commercial value and stuff. And under Mike Ashley, the terrible sponsorship deals we made no money. And, Kieran spoke about that many times before. Like, it was pathetic. Like, Newcastle at that time, when Mike Ashley took over, probably the same level as Tottenham, I would say, basically, again. And then by the time he left, Newcastle had been relegated twice and were making no money whatsoever. So I think, and then also you got to think, when this is the end of that 3-year rolling period. So the start of the rolling period, we were still under Mike Ashley. Then obviously the takeover happens October 2021. And From there, we are in a relegation battle. So in the January, straight away, they splash £100 million on 5 new players, including Bruno, Dan Burn, Chris Wood. And that's obviously needed straight away, that money coming in. And then after that, Newcastle haven't sold very well, to be honest.
Yes.
Under the new regime, haven't sold very well at all. Alan Saint-Maximin and Chris Wood are the only ones I can think of that made any real money. So I think we're always going to be in this position that we did need to sell someone. It obviously turned into 2 players. I think, yes, maybe the club did leave it too late, but I've got to say that in the end, they got it done. And you've got to actually throw it back to the fact that one of the main reasons we're in trouble with PSR is actually because of what happened years and years and years ago when they weren't even involved, when PIF were not involved. It was Mike Ashley's lack of commercial deals and also the fact that the squad was not remotely equipped to stay in the Premier League. So I think, although the ownership took some flack, and that's fair enough, maybe for leaving it too late, I actually think there's a wider context to this. And in the end, they've actually done really well. And we're going to avoid a punt seduction. And we didn't sell Gordon, Isak, or Bruno. And I think that's a win.
Yeah, I think for me, as a fan, the optics were, it's kind of like I've gone on holiday, come back and someone's going, oh my God, Mark, your house is on fire. I'm like, but it's fine now. I'm like, okay. So there was a potential disaster about to happen, but it is okay. I just feel like the way that they've operated, and you absolutely nailed it, Jack, like we don't sell well, or we haven't sold well. I think £35 million for Elliot Anderson, who I have seen in the league. I do think he's limited. He works hard, bless him. Great. You have to do so much more now in the Premier League. And the fact that we got £35 million was outrageous. And I genuinely am gutted about Minteh. And in without these rules, I don't think we would have sold him. The thing for me that makes it even worse is your team, Kieran, they don't typically make mistakes. And when I saw other teams coming into him, like Lyon, okay, the French league's quite a weak league, and Everton, okay, will they buy donkeys on a regular now for far too much money? But then when Brighton came in, and I was like, oh no, not Brighton, because again, they're probably one of the best run clubs in the Premier League, and they don't make a mistake. There was a lot of money for a player that typically you're the Newcastle in this story of you get them for 7 and sell them on for 30. Is that like a change of direction for Brighton, or is that, do you think that's where you are now as a club?
I think you're right. There has been a change at the club. You know, three decent finishes by the standards of Brighton Hove Albion. Last season, they broke the 2 biggest signings. They signed João Pedro from Watford for 30 million. Decent player, got 18 goals last season. They signed a guy from France for 26. So I think they've shifted from going in sort of the 10 to 20 million pound bracket to sort of the 20 to 30. And there's also a Brighton premium these days because they don't tend to go in for turkeys. If somebody's sniffing around, what normally happens is that Brighton put in a bid and get gazumped by Chelsea.
You'll become their scouting network. That's what are you doing over there? Well, they did that with us with Toaston, didn't they? We were leading the race for Adebayo, and then they've nabbed him at the last minute.
It's just happened at Dewsbury Hall. Brighton was.
What a weird one. I don't see that at all.
He fits in at Brighton more than he does fit in at Chelsea.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You don't need midfield players.
Yeah,
they don't. Not a
weird one. Another question on PSR. Why would a team not wait, knowing we needed to sell? Why would they not wait until today to put bids in? Why are people seeming to help us when you could then just wait and then kind of, because Newcastle and Brighton will be going for the same sort of position next season. We're looking to both push into Europe. Why would you help us? Why not wait that day? Is there, in financial terms, is there a reason why they would wait for that?
Well, I think it's sort of 2 or 3 reasons. First of all, it could be that Newcastle United would have accepted an offer from another club on the 30th of June.
Okay.
And Brighton would have lost out on Minteh from their point of view. Secondly, what we are seeing in the Premier League at present is that, as you're probably aware, there are monthly meetings of Premier League chief executives.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see alliances form between clubs. Unusual alliances at times. Yeah. Now, Brighton have got a pretty good working relationship with Newcastle. You know, when Newcastle United were interested in signing Dan Burn, the attitude of Brighton was, we love him as a player. We love him as a human being. He's done fantastically well, but it's an opportunity for him to go home. And Brighton's approach has always been, you try to see the bigger picture. Don't view football players as just commodities. So I think there's a good working relationship between the two sets of boards. And it could be that the situation's reversed in a year or two. And good turns get remembered. And then thirdly, whilst all the talk is in respect of the 30th of June, you could have actually delayed the actual confirmation of the deal for 3 or 4 days, because the way that the rules work is that if the two clubs have agreed a fee or have agreed broadly a deal, and there's a few bits of small print, just haggling over the add-ons, or the player was on holiday and one had to come in for the medical, but the two clubs had agreed, you can still have deals going through later this week, in my opinion, which will be classified as 23, 24 deals. So I think Newcastle are professional, Brighton are professional, and they just wanted to deal with it in a professional manner. Because if that sale had not gone through, what would the media have been talking about over the course of the next week? Newcastle have probably breached the limit, and there would have been, bedwetting, toys out of pram, tantrums, and so on. So why not just go and get the deal done and announced? midnight on the night of the 30th of June, stroke the 1st of July, and then at least everybody wakes up and go, well, that's a sigh of relief. I can now focus on moaning about how England played last night.
So we've lost a right winger. Jack, who do you want to see come in? Very quickly touching on Newcastle transfers. I think it's unforgivable to sell Minteh, but I've said before, if we replace him, I'll be okay. Is there anyone you have in mind?
He's gone, isn't he? He's obviously gone. Yankuba Minteh now. I'm thinking he'll do well at Brighton. To be fair, I think I'll be interested to see how he does. But
we all know well he will.
They don't miss with their transfers. And if you look at how Matoma did, for example, coming in from quite an unknown sort of, like, no one really knew he was, and now look at him and look at Minteh. So I think he'll do really well. It is a shame we've had to sell him. Right wing is the big position, isn't it, for Newcastle this summer? It just is. Like we have to sign a top right winger. I love Brian Mbeumo. I think he's fantastic. Brentford winger. Just like a great goal scorer. Does link up really well. He's only 24. He had a bad injury last season. That was where Brentford season kind of fell apart. They were doing fine without even Tony. They had a Mbeumo up front, and I think his off the ball stuff is excellent as well. I think he'd fit into Newcastle's team pretty perfectly, actually.
How much would he set us back, do you think?
Well, obviously they're going to look to sell Ivan Toney, aren't they? So then you've got a question over that. Ivan Toney goes, do they even need to sell Mbeumo then? Maybe not. But you're probably looking at between 40 and 50 million, aren't you, really? Realistically.
Bo, who do you want to see come in?
Yeah, so Jack, that's a great shout. I feel like there's love divisions to this. Like, if we want the very, very high class Rolls Royce, I think it'd be somebody like Takefusa Kubo from Sociedad.
Has to get the name in.
Exactly. No, I'm gonna say it as much as possible so the algorithm pushes it. But he would be the one who would probably set you back about 70, 80 mil. Brian Mbeumo would be great at that mid-level, probably 40 to 50 mil. And then if you're bargain shopping, I really like Jonathan Rowe from Norwich. Yeah, from Norwich. Yeah. He's done very, very well. But I feel like that would be more of like an Ashley signing from the Championship instead. So I think with the money that we've gotten in now, we should be free to sell or free to buy a little bit more and spend a little bit more. So I'm hoping we can go Mbeumo or Kubo, but yeah, I know people have said Chiesa as well. He would be great. I know he primarily plays on the left, but he can play a little bit everywhere. So I'd be great with that also. So
I wanted Elise, so I'm just going to cry into my cereal every moment to see that he went to Bayern Munich. I think he's a great player. But I sold the player I didn't want to sell. We're not going to buy the player I want to buy. So again, I'm just a stroppy Newcastle fan this summer. Just lastly on transfers, okay. Obviously, we've made this money. It's hard to make like what is making money these days, what's not. With what you've seen in Newcastle's activity, what do you think budget-wise, will have for the summer? Do you expect big spending? Do you expect sensible spending?
I think it will be modest. If we take a look at the end of last summer, the total squad of Newcastle United's total squad cost was £472 million. So that's pretty sizable by Premier League standards. You've got 3 clubs who have got squads which have cost more than £1 billion in Chelsea, Manchester United, and Manchester City. Then there's quite a sizable drop down to Liverpool and Chelsea, to Liverpool, and then you've got Arsenal, Spurs, Newcastle, not that much far apart. Newcastle don't have Champions League football this summer and this season, which you have to take into consideration going forwards. And also, I know it's not what you want to hear from the players' perspective. If you want elite players, you've got to be able. What have you got to offer them? You've got to be able to offer them somewhere like they like living in London. And Newcastle isn't London. I love Newcastle. It's a great place to go for a weekend with my missus. It's a great place to go as an away fan. But if I'm not a 22-year-old lad from wherever who wants to spend all of his time in the bright lights. So it's not got the attraction of being in London. It's not got the attraction of Champions League in terms of what they can offer them. That means you've either got to go and overpay on money, or you've got to be able to sell them a dream. And that's quite the money's one thing, but I don't think Newcastle particularly want to go down that particular route. They've seen what's happened at Everton when Everton's wage bill doubled over the course of 2 seasons, and didn't really move the dial in terms of where the club finished in the table. And you're talking about problems selling players. And I think you're being a wee bit harsh in my view, because, again, I sort of benchmark Newcastle United against Manchester City. When the takeover first acquired, they brought in a lot of players. They brought in those players on big wages. The trouble is the players don't want to move. They're on, unless somebody's willing to match that money. The problem is you either have to allow them to sit on their backsides, or you have to accept a relatively low fee for them in order for the whole package for the buying club to be acceptable, if they're having to go inherit some things in wages. Manchester City did exactly the same when Abu Dhabi acquired. You look at some of the signings that they made, the likes of Joe and Rubinho and
Alano.
It's just a long list of
Rocky Santa Cruz.
And they could get away with it in those days because there wasn't PSR. So I think Newcastle have to be a wee bit more canny. They've got to keep an eye on the clock, and it would seem daft to spend too much now and then have no flexibility come January, or be in a position this time next year where, once again, due to PSR, they have to let somebody who is very promising go. So the transfer market's not really my scene. I'm a nerd. I'm a sort of analytical nerd in terms of the finances. But from what I've seen of Newcastle, I think they've spent money to get themselves to a top 6, top 8 club, and I think they're going to maintain that level of expenditure until 1 or 2 seasons. They're going to sort of incrementally. The new deal with Adidas, the deal, once you got 3 years of seller coming through as far as PSR, that's all beneficial, and then the club can perhaps have another step up. The thing is, as football fans, when I say 2 or 3 years, nobody wants to know. 2 or 3 weeks is too long. And I think we have become very impatient as fans in terms of our expectations, especially when new owners or there has been some form of transformation of the club.
I think it's more about if they can bridge the gap. All we keep hearing is we can't. But they are changing the rules, aren't they? Coming in next year or altering them slightly. I keep hearing the word anchoring. Are you able to shed some light on there for novices like me?
Yeah, I think from 25-26, PSR as we know it will go. And instead, the Premier League will mirror the new rules which exist under UEFA. And those rules are as follows. First of all, you can, under UEFA, you can lose 60 million euro over 3 years. So I think the equivalent is going to be higher in the Premier League. But the key thing is that if you are playing in a UEFA competition, you can spend no more than 70% of the money that the club makes from ticket sales, commercial, TV, and player sale profits. You can spend 70% on that, on what they call squad costs, which will be player wages. And I think there'll be some arguments as to what constitutes player wages at times.
Yeah.
The transfer fees spread over the life of the contract, which is a thing called amortization. Agents' fees, because agents are the big bad wolf in football. They're the pantomime villain. Any player write-downs. So that effectively reinforces the status quo, because let's put it crudely. Manchester City last year generated £700 million of revenue, which means that they can spend £490 million on wages and the other stuff. Let's assume that Newcastle United generate £250 million in revenue. They can spend £175 million on wages. So they've got a £300 million deficit compared to Manchester City. Manchester City are a very, very well-run club. They don't tend to make many errors themselves. Okay, Calvin Phillips is the one which sticks out. But other than that, you compare them to the number of errors that Manchester United have made in the transfer market, it's very, very few and far between. So I think that's the challenge for Newcastle United, in the sense that how do you get from 250 million a year to 300 to 400 to 500 to 600 to 700? Can you see that's going to take that's going to take till the end of this decade before their match. And Manchester City's revenue, that's going to be going up all the time, because if they continue winning trophies. I think the big issue at Manchester City is, as a football fan, I don't think Guardiola gets enough credit for what a genius he is, and how City are going to cope when he leaves. And I think there's a 50-50 chance that he's going to go at the end of this season. I think that's going to be a big challenge for them.
Yeah, I think as soon as I keep saying, as soon as he goes, as soon as he leaves, I say he is an absolute genius. He is the glue that holds them together. Man City they were nowhere near this dominant. They always spent more than everyone else, and even if they keep signing the right players, you're taking away the Alex Ferguson of City, and we also happen 29. I don't think that'll happen quite as much as City, but I do think they'll definitely have a big drop off. Like I imagine Liverpool will have this year in an adjustment season with Arne Slot, although I think he is a good manager. Jack, I want to ask you about, there's been some, keeping on the financial side, something I quite enjoy, because I absolutely despise with a passion all financial rules in football. There was never a problem. There was never a problem until they came in. There was never an issue in football that I can remember, apart from badly run clubs down below and the sort of Leeds United and whatnot, that these rules now, in my opinion, make it worse for the smaller clubs, because once you've been penalised, you go down, then you got no money, then you get penalised again, and it's harder to swim back up. But teams are now having a fun old merry-go-round of trading players amongst each other, and the Premier League don't seem to be too happy about it. What's your thoughts on that method of getting around the PSR issues?
I've got nothing wrong with the method. I think that ultimately the Premier League have created this situation which is absolutely baffling to football fans. Like, as a football fan, I love seeing academy players coming through and playing for the club, and like being in the first team and doing well for the first team. I love that. I remember Andy Carroll coming through, loved it. I know he obviously went like relatively early in his career, but for that short time he was Newcastle striker, it was amazing. I mean, Chulami will be less so, but we've had other academy players. Shearer, obviously not academy player, but etc. coming back. Geordie, I think as a football fan, I love that academy player thing, and we've created this just ridiculous situation where you are now being encouraged to sell your academy players because it's pure profit in this financial system. So Conor Gallagher was one of Chelsea's best players last season, no doubt. He was the captain when. Pochettino made him captain when Ben Chilwell wasn't fit. He was brilliant for them, apart from Cole Palmer. He was their second best player. And throughout the whole season, they were talking about how they were desperate to sell him. They were desperate to sell him. So I don't get it. I think it's the rules that have been created. Clubs, I don't mind swap it. I don't mind them doing it. I just feel sorry for the youth players. I feel sorry that they don't get to play for their boyhood club, their academy club. They just get shifted off. I do feel sorry for them. Like, I get it. It's the way it is. But as I say, as a football fan, I love seeing these academy players play for my team. And it's a shame that we've come to this weird scenario where they're getting actively moved on just for teams to fit in with the financial rules. I won't get it.
How about you, Bo?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's Jack is exactly right. I mean, when you think of some of the players who have come through, I mean, even their most recent ones, Elliot Anderson, hell, you could even say Dan Burn. You know, looking back, they'd probably be like, man, I would have loved to stay with Newcastle for all of my career, you know, from academy to now. And now those players aren't going to be having that much of an attachment. And then generally, we know players don't have much of an attachment unless something special. So you're not going to see a ton of players actually, you know, wanting to continue and be with their teams for seasons and seasons down the line, because they know if I, you know, say if I want to stay here and I love it too much, I might have to be, you know, I might be next on the chopping block just because we have to balance the books a little bit. But we'll be interested to see kind of what the next couple of years look like once those rules have changed and all the trials are put away, and we'll probably find something else to complain about that we're skirting the rules around. So until then, we'll have to deal with PSR.
I'll tell you what, in a few years' time, I'll still be crying that we still haven't replaced Minteh. We're still playing Murphy and Almiron on the right wing. Still not Porter right winger. As soon as we got taken over, I was like, get in, right winger. This is just what we need. We've since then bought like 4 centre backs in 5 midfielders, 17.
Many left wingers.
17 goalkeepers. We've got us and Brian have got all the goalkeepers in the world. Kieran, I'd love to ask you more and more questions, but we're going to have to wrap it up. Jack, Bo, thank you very much for joining. Kieran, thank you very, very much again. It's been a pleasure having you on today. Thank you for answering all and let me vent about PSR. For everyone watching on YouTube, do hit like and subscribe. It really does mean a lot. And go check out the Price of Football podcast hosted by Kieran. It is fantastic. Boys, thank you very much for your time and have a good evening.
Thanks for the invite.